The biggest thing for me is that we are able to answer the questions that you have as you're joining today's session. Today's session is called Mapping a Courageous Leadership Journey. And my name is Jadinette Santos. I am from She Should Run. I will share a little bit of information about She Should Run, about our agenda today, and then we'll get right into what does it mean to map a courageous leadership journey, specifically as you are thinking about running for office. So as we're going through and doing all of that, again, for those of you who may have just signed on, the chat is open. I try to check that periodically throughout the entire time I'm speaking. And then later in today's session, we are going to have a conversation with Reverend Dr. Bernadine Kraft. And at that point, you'll be able to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have a candid conversation with her. So let's go ahead and get started. What I want to do is a quick poll. So this should pop up directly on your screen. We have just a few questions to be able to get to know you a little better, to warm up the room, since you all are part of this association and are a nationwide audience. Wanted to get a feel for where you all are coming from. So my colleague, Kathleen Kiernan, who you cannot see on screen, but who is the brains behind this operation, will be getting that moving for us. For the first question on the poll will be, where do you live? The second question is, what issue do you feel most passionate about? And the third question is, where do you fall in your family? So we'll have these questions up briefly for you to answer. It just gives us a little bit of a sense of where everyone's joining us from today, what you are interested in when it comes to policy, and how you might be interested in receiving information or using that information to move forward. So that poll will be up for just a little bit longer, and then we'll share the results with all of you. We'll go for 1 minute because I know people are joining. For those of you joining, you'll see a poll right in front of you. This is just to get a better sense of who is in this virtual room with us. You will be asked, where do you live? What issues you feel most passionate about? And where do you fall in your family? We're going to go for, I think we're about 30 seconds left on this poll. Also, if you're just joining, be sure to utilize the chat as we're talking today. You can engage with other members who are attending. Just make sure that your to line says to all panelists and attendees. And later in the session, we'll use the Q&A box that can be found if you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen. So I think we're down to about 10 seconds. Go ahead and fill in your answers on that poll. And then Kathleen will go ahead and publish the results for us. All right, I think we're good to close the poll. Excellent. All right, so here is what we got. The majority of our folks joining today are from the Southeast, which is hugely exciting to me. I am also in the Southeast. I am hailing from Fort Lauderdale, Florida today. So all you Southeasterners, a big welcome for me, but we also have pretty good representation from everywhere else. So excited to have such good coast to coast representation with us today. Without much surprise, the two issues that are of most interest to this group are education and healthcare policy. That makes perfect sense. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how your skills and talents as counselors, or maybe we have social workers or psychologists on the line today. We're going to talk about how those have real relevance in a political space and how you can bring those talents to bear as elected officials. So really excited to see that consistency in the issues that you're most interested in. And it looks like oldest is just shy of half of you are the oldest in your families. So people who like to take charge and care for others. I'm not surprised to see that, though we also have pretty good contingencies of olders and youngest. And we do have two people here who are twins. I don't know if you're twins to each other. I doubt it, but that would be fun if you were able to attend today as a twin. Excellent. Well, thank you for participating. I'd just like to warm up the room a little bit, get to know where you are all joining from. Again, I will be speaking throughout the entirety of this session, but please utilize the chat to get to know one another and to ask questions. I check it periodically as I'm speaking today, and I want this to be an interactive experience for all of you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get right into it. Like I said, this session is called Mapping a Courageous Leadership Journey, but we want to also get you familiar with who She Should Run is. So we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is working to dramatically increase the number of women who are running for office. And we have this grand vision of seeing 250,000 women on the ballot. That reason is because there's approximately 500,000 elected offices available throughout the United States. And having 250,000 women running would mean that about half of those positions have women running for them. Women make up just slightly more than half the population, but are severely underrepresented in elective office. And we are eager to move representation forward by encouraging women to consider running. So we sit in a position where we are approachable to anyone who might have questions or curiosities about what it means to run for office. So unlike traditional campaign training organizations that focus on the nuts and bolts of how to fundraise or how to build a campaign team or how to do a stump speech, we focus much more on how do we motivate women from all walks of life, all different experiences, to explore the possibility of running for office and how to tackle the barriers that may stand in their way to achieving elected leadership. So we focus this all through data-driven content, through education, and through collective action. One of the collective actions that we're doing is a webinar just like this, where we're able to gather people of similar experiences, similar professional backgrounds, and share what you can do to move forward in your consideration of running for office. So moving into today's agenda, we are going to focus on why counselors should run for office, the unique talents that you bring to bear, what imposter syndrome is and how to combat it. And I'm going to pause right there because I assume that for many of you, thinking about, talking about, teaching about imposter syndrome is old hat, something that you are familiar with and know how to do. However, in my short experience with counselors, I feel like it's very easy to focus these things on other people. And you really want to make sure that you're focusing this session, everything we do today, on what does this mean for you? Specifically, what does it mean for you in pursuing leadership goals? And hopefully one of those leadership goals is running for office. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about pursuing political leadership. And then we'll end today's session with a conversation with Reverend Dr. Bernadine Kraft. She will be introduced by the CEO of ACA. So we'll get to that part at the end. Again, that is the moment where you will want to use the Q&A function at the bottom bar of your Zoom. If you have any questions or thoughts throughout today, go ahead and throw them in the chat. But I want to start with this question of what qualities do you admire about women in leadership? So sometimes this is helpful if you think about specifically a woman leader who you admire. And why do you admire her? What is she bringing to that leadership role that you think is exceptional, that you think is something that you want to emulate yourself? And go ahead, as you're thinking through these qualities, throw them right in the chat. I want to be able to read some of these out loud and see how they come in. So the first one we have is caring. We appreciate women leaders who are caring, who show compassion. A lot of smiley face. People who are confident, women who have vision, women who are brave and transparent, who have strength, determination, confidence, who are able to show vulnerability, who are passionate, who combine strength and emotion and authenticity, integrity. I love this list. What I also love is how quickly we're able to think through these things. We do have no hang-ups about the fact that women emulate competent, compassionate, relevant leadership. That there is a boldness of character and strength that we see as women lead our country, as women lead businesses, as women lead education spheres, and that we want this to come to bear. These are things that we want to emulate ourselves. I want you to think about all this. And the reason I start with this is our foundation, right? We know that women are rational, thoughtful, compassionate, that they are concerned about diversity and inclusion. We know all of these things as a foundation of women's leadership. But now we're going to go ahead and take a step into the murky frustrations of how women's leadership is shown on a grand and systematic scale. So these are a couple headlines that were pulled fairly recently. And notice where they place the blame, notice where they place the negative emotions or negative stereotyping in these headlines. So the first one we have, is the confidence gap women's fault? Even after years of, even after the glass ceiling yields, female executives find shaky ground. More than half of American men are uncomfortable with the idea of a female political leader. Or ladies, doing this at work is killing your career. What we see in various headlines or stories that are shared with us through our existence in society is that women are unfit for leadership roles, and that the images that we are introduced to, whether it be actual images and pictures that we see, whether it be the history of people who have been in leadership, whether it be the categorical gendered strengths and talents that we associate, we often put men as the default for effective leadership and women for the default of emotional or irrational leadership and barely scraping by in this sphere. But if we go back to our foundation, we know that that's incorrect. So how do we exist in this sphere knowing that we fully embody these excellent demonstrations of political or other leadership, even though we might exist in a society or in a culture that does not prepare for that norm? And that's what we're going to focus on today. Also, I'm going to share with this is the importance of having more women in politics specifically. So you'll hear a lot of these same things associated with why we need women in media, why we need women in business, etc. But these same things are true in politics. So Lauren Ramoski, who's the vice president of HR Gartner, shares that individuals should work in an organization where you can see people like you in order to avoid things like imposter syndrome. And when we do this, we can give individuals a lot more confidence, and it lets individuals see people similar to themselves making strides and succeeding. However, this isn't always possible for underrepresented groups. Furthermore, instead of encouraging diversity and inclusion, it seems to discourage individuals from minority groups from entering particular workspaces or industries where people like them are sorely underrepresented. It also abnegates companies of their responsibility to ensure that they have a diverse workforce and make all employees feel welcomed and accepted. Now, think about this. This is applied to companies, right? Think about this in terms of government. And government is in charge of dictating the rules of society. And that without representation, we are telling constituents, recipients of that society and those rules, that they are not worthy of being represented, that their experiences don't matter, that there isn't an inclusive space for them. And that when we have more women in politics, we actually see these really incredible outcomes. We see increases in legislation that specifically protect women and children. We see increases in overall health of nations. We see increased collaboration across party lines and ability to move legislation forward. That having women in politics, yes, it absolutely impacts representation. It absolutely impacts feelings of inclusion and security, but it also has very real impacts in how we deliver these outcomes for the people that we serve. Right now, we are in a space specifically, so we're going to talk about women at large, but since this is a group of counselors, I also want to specifically address that right now in Congress, we do not have representation of counselors. You all just shared with me that you really care about education, that you really care about healthcare, that you really care about all of these other things, and you have direct experience in these fields and how it affects people, and your voices absolutely need to be heard in policy-making decisions. So I just wanted to put together this quick slide. I'm going to go through it briefly because I want to be able to spend a lot of time on the tools and techniques that we can use. But I want you to hear this and think about these skills as they show up for you personally. So why should counselors run for office? Because you're excellent listeners. One of the number one things that we talk to women about is their ability to go into their communities and hear the needs of their neighbors, of their community members, people who think like them, and people who absolutely don't think like them. This is a standard practice for how you operate every single day, and something that is sorely missing in several elected positions. So thinking through how this skill really comes to bear for you as someone who could be running for office. Evidence-based tools that help your clients. Y'all are really good at making sure you're up to date on the best techniques, on the best research, on the best ways to serve the clients in your care. This is, again, that same skill that you want to have when you're making decisions that impact every community member, every member of your state, every member of your country. You want people who are familiar with dissecting data in the effort to serve the people that they work with. This is an excellent way to bring that to bear in a political sphere. I'm just kind of reading through the comments here, and underscoring too that someone asked their husband recently if they could do research on how many people in Congress are counselors, and they only came up with just a few psychologists. And I actually think there might be 2 social workers in our most current Congress, that 117th Congress. Again, this representation is missing, and there's so much that this group brings. Oh, someone adding a skilled mediator to the list. Excellent. Thank you for making that known for me. So I'm just going to go through these last 3 pieces that you all bring to bear. I really think that there is something to be said about the resourcefulness that exists in this profession, or this group of professions. The need to quickly know how to help a teenager who might be at risk, versus how to go and talk to a whole family, versus how to go and talk to a couple who might be experiencing trauma. Being able to pick out the different tactics and techniques for how to speak to them, when to bring in fidget toys and distractions, when to be more calm, when to be more aggressive, and knowing how to make all of those things happen in real time, and pulling all of the things at your disposal to your needs. To be empathetic, to be able to place yourself in the positions of others and really think about what they need. While we need a diverse set of representatives, no one representative is going to be able to understand all of the various experiences of everyone that they serve. This ability to combine active listening and then transform it into action, to actually envision and empathize with what that experience could mean and what needs would need to come from government to serve that need, is vastly important. And finally, you're critical thinkers, that you can think through a problem from beginning to end and find solutions to that problem, that you analyze it along the way, that you collect information and data, you share that with the people who are relevant so that you can get to the best answers. Make sure that you're providing this for yourself, that you're taking time to think about how you've honed these skills over time and where you want to apply them outside of your chosen profession. And so, okay, we're going to go ahead and get right into the tools and techniques for today. We're going to start with understanding imposter syndrome. And as I mentioned, I know that this is going to be old news for some of you. And being the daughter of a medical professional, I know that doctors often make the worst patients. I am begging you to be good patients as we talk through imposter syndrome, because it's very likely that while we talk about these things for other people, we do not give ourselves time to think about them for ourselves. And so I want you to think about yourself today. Okay, so imposter syndrome, right? We know this is defined as the crippling feeling of self-doubt, intellectual inadequacy, and anticipated failure that haunts people who attribute their success to luck or help from others rather than their own abilities. So the term comes from 1978, when psychologist Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes first noticed the phenomenon while interviewing college-aged women. And so that despite all of these significant achievements, they would still look in the mirror and they would see failure. They would look in the mirror and see someone who they would refer to as a fraud or unworthy, or they were pulling a grand ruse on everyone. And I like this image here, right? Because you have all these visual representations and reminders of success, reminders of accomplishment. And yet, even on this woman herself, she's got her crown, she's got her robe, but she still is questioning her own abilities. And so what does it take for us to recognize that behavior is happening for us and then to stop it? So we're going to go through, there are a variety of ways that imposter syndrome can manifest. I will list these quickly, but I want you to think through, are any of these showing up for you in general? Have any of them shown up for you even today as I was going through the list of skills that counselors bring? What were you thinking as we went through that? So the first one, a difficulty accepting praise and recognition for personal accomplishments. A reluctance to seize opportunities and take initiative. A reluctance to accept promotions or new assignments because of not feeling ready. I need to do more. Once I get 2 more years experience, then I'll be ready, even though someone's telling you that you're ready now. By the way, I'm telling you right now, you're ready to run for office. Trouble highlighting personal contributions to projects, the desire to thank the team, thank all of the people who supported you. And certainly those are relevant roles in one's life, but always shying away from any sort of accolades or praise for oneself. Then in the reverse, trouble delegating due to a need to ensure that everything is done to impossibly high standards. You hold yourself to such a high standard that no one's ever going to be able to reach it, not even you. So why put that burden on others? I will just do it. And you lead by individualism and a difficulty accepting help. Maybe it shows up in forms of procrastination. You're nervous because you feel like these impossibly high standards are never going to be accomplished. So you're going to be immobilized by fears of failure. Or maybe you're a workaholic. You have this feeling of incompetence or perceived need to work harder in order to keep up with your contemporaries, that you're not able to accomplish the same amount of things in the same amount of time as they are. So you have to overwork to make up your slack. These are all different ways that imposter syndrome can show up, and none of them are founded in truth, but that doesn't mean that the behaviors aren't a true experience for us. So how do we first name, okay, this is happening versus now I go and do something about it? So we've kind of broken these two, right, into what imposter syndrome feels like and experience is like to what it is in reality. And so what it might feel like is other people around me know so much, and they know everything I know, and they're perfect. They encompass all of my qualifications and all of my capabilities, and they have all of these others on top of that. When in reality, you are full and whole and encompass everything that you were able to contribute. And others are full and whole and they encompass everything that they are able to contribute. And there might be some overlap between the two of you, and there might not. And it takes all kinds and all experiences and all expertises to get to a end product that we can be proud of and that best serves others. And we best come to those tables when we acknowledge that we have something worthwhile to share, that we have experiences that have prepared us for these opportunities, and that we take them with seriousness, the same way that we take others with seriousness. So there are 4 thoughts on how to do this. These come from the Center for Creative Leadership, these 4 easy ways to combat imposter syndrome. So the first one is focusing on facts. So the way to do this is to just list out, what are your accomplishments? If you were just objective with yourself. For me, I accomplished getting a bachelor's degree in political science, and then I got a master's degree in public administration. I have been a working professional for X number of years and promoted X number of times. I've received this award, whatever it is, just a whole list of facts that are objective, that aren't associated with any emotion, but just serve as an underscoring of, oh yes, this is what the truth actually is for me. The second is to challenge limiting beliefs. So examining your beliefs about criteria for success, and then looking for facts or examples to test whether those criteria are actually valid and how they might hold you back. I think this is really interesting when you think about running for office, because there is no position description. For example, saying, okay, you need this many years as a leader, and this many years supervising someone, and this degree in order to qualify for running for office. The qualifications for running for office are that you be of a certain age and you be of a certain residence. That's it. Those are the qualifications. And so what are the stories that you're telling yourself that are limiting your desires to move forward? Are you telling yourself, I need a law degree? Are you telling yourself, I have to have worked on a campaign before? What are the beliefs that you've attached to different goals that you set that are you're then using against yourself to not pursue what you want to do? The next is claiming your strength. So instead of focusing on your weaknesses, embrace your assets and reflect on how to leverage them more fully to advocate for yourself and your own strengths. So I talk about this often as like being your own best friend. I have a wonderful, kind, loving, empowering best friend. She's actually a counselor and on the call today. Her name is Elizabeth Wall, and I adore her. So I think to myself, what would be the things that she would say about me? What are the strengths that she would have me go into this? Because sometimes it's hard for me to do that for myself, but I know that she would claim my strength. And so maybe I can put myself there and do it. Maybe some of you are excellent at claiming your strength on your own, but whatever you need to do to say, okay, I have these skills, I have these strengths, I can remember this, and I'm going to own it and take it in a real way. And then finally, to talk about it. This should be something that's very familiar to all of you, and hopefully something that you practice for yourselves as well. Moving forward and saying, okay, I have this thing that I'm thinking about. Maybe I have a limiting belief and I need to test it with someone. I need to hear these words out loud and I need you to give me some feedback. Am I being overly hard on myself, or is this a real gray area that I could improve on? Can you help me see it? More often than not, as we share things that we're worried about in terms of imposter syndrome with someone that we trust, we'll get some clear understanding of where we're doing really well and some feedback on where we can improve, but all of it delivered more often than not in greater compassion than we will give ourselves. And so having someone that you can talk about it with. Okay, so imposter syndrome. We're going to move from imposter syndrome into understanding fear. Because these are a little bit different than imposter syndrome. There are real fears that people have about running for office. In fact, I see this in the chat right now. What if we are inexperienced in the political scene? How do counselors get visibility to create minimal likelihood of being considered in an election? These are real fears. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to fundraise. I'm worried about the privacy that will exist for myself or my family or my friends if I choose to run for office. I've never done this before, so I don't even know how to start, and I don't know how to establish credibility. I'm afraid of rejection, and I have no idea what will happen if I don't win, and I'll feel like a huge failure. Or, oh my gosh, I have no idea what will happen if I do win. This learning curve is so big, and I have no idea how to be responsible for all of that. The learning curve will be really hard, or I don't feel qualified enough. These are fears that we hear all day. And I cannot fully rid you of any fears that you might be feeling. But what I can help you do is work through processes to help you get there. So we're going to, Kathleen, if you'll actually skip through the quotes on fear, I'm just cognizant of time. I want us to be able to have a good conversation with Bernadine. So I had a couple quotes by Maya Angelou, by Reshma Shujani. There's excellent quotes about fear. Confront your fears. Yay, I want you to have time to speak with one of your own. But one of the things that we can do to combat fear is to build emotional courage. And so this is made up of 3 steps. The first is determining the basis of our fear. Is this real or is it hypothetical? So is the fear real? Privacy is a real one. Is if I put my life in the public sphere, am I going to be safe? Are my loved ones going to be safe? That's a real fear versus a hypothetical fear of like, what if I don't win? And what will I do with that rejection? That's not happened. There's no way to address it. You can think about it, but it's not based in a current reality. So first, determining the basis of your fear. Knowing that whether it's real or hypothetical doesn't change that you're feeling it. It just changes the way that we build processes to deal with it. So the second is a process. And third is making a plan to move forward. So these are the steps that we work on to build emotional courage. And one of the reasons it's so important for us to build emotional courage is because when we are feeling fear, whether it be this real or hypothetical fear, that we are much less likely to take risks, to innovate, to successfully problem solve, that it has this weight that you can physically feel or emotionally feel that hinders your ability to show up as well as you might otherwise. So then we move into, we've understood the basis of our fear. We recognize whether this is real or whether this is hypothetical. We've grounded ourselves in that space of explaining why we fear it and what we're doing. Then we move forward to focus on the process. This is just a quick quote from Harvard Business Review that says, a good process will guide you along the path to get you where you want to go, and you can follow a good process no matter what you're feeling. So maybe you have a fear, this one will be more practical and less politically focused. Maybe you have a fear of not performing well at work, and you're really, really nervous that you're not doing as well as you could be, and that nobody likes you, and it's really hindering your ability to show up. Maybe I'm not doing as well by my clients as I could be, or maybe the principal at the school doesn't like me, or maybe my colleagues think I'm a failure. I'm nervous and anxious about this. Okay, so you have to Establish, is this a real fear? Is it based on evidence? I have reason to believe. The principal has sent me a letter telling me, Jari, I don't like you, or something that I have that's concrete. Or is this a, what if they don't like me? What if I'm not performing well? And then moving forward to a process. So let's assume that this is hypothetical. So what can I do to then move forward with that? I can have regular meetings with my colleagues to touch base and receive feedback from them and share my feedback with them. And we can also use that time to celebrate successes. Maybe that will help me feel more connected with them. Maybe I want to make sure that I have regularly scheduled performance reviews, or maybe I send a survey to my clients and I get a feel for how their experience has been working with me. So whatever you need to do to build that into a process, instead of letting this fear live in a giant cloud, moving it forward into like, okay, there are steps I can take, and these will help me get to the conclusion, which will then alleviate my fear. So whatever process you need to move forward, turning that into a list. For those of you I told to get notebooks and pens and papers, go ahead and write whatever your fear is and then start a list below it. If you have ideas right now, go ahead and write them down, or if they come to you after this session, but make sure that you actually take the time to reflect on that. There is one specific process that works extremely well in a political sense, because so much about running for office is being able to communicate to other people. And I find that this is a really helpful process to go through, even when we're communicating with ourselves about decisions that we hope to make. So this is built up of 4 components, which are vision, empathy, direction, and proof. So the first one is vision. So when you're communicating with others, especially running for office, you want to be able to share with them, this is the grand place that I want to take you to. I imagine a world where da, 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 and you include all of the different things that you want to work for, that you want to see happen, the change that you want to advocate for or persist with as an elected leader. And you want this to be so easy for everyone to understand, something that they can memorize, that they can repeat. When they think of you, they think of this. So you want something super succinct, simple, palpable, and clear. And you don't just want this for the people that you hope vote for you. You want this for you, so you can remind yourself, this is my vision. This is what I'm working towards. This is how I'm going to get there. The next is empathy. So this is the way that people feel connected, that they feel like you're going to take the time to use that active listening to respond to the needs they communicate, that people will know that you're not out of touch because they can see the way that you've taken strides to understand their experience and incorporate that into the things that you actually do. This is also shown in great ways when we correct course, when we thought we knew exactly what we were going to do, and then we got new information, and so then we changed it. You want to make sure that your empathy is always authentic. So don't try to change your voice or change your views because you assume that's what people want. Do it because you feel an actual, genuine, heartfelt connection to what is going on with them, and that you feel that towards yourself. Don't try to contrive a version of yourself that you think is the right one. Really take time to connect with yourself and follow where your intuition guides you with that. The next is direction. So unlike the vision, the direction is more objective driven. This is the checkpoints. This is, okay, if I do A and then I can do B and then I can do C. They want to know what that path is. Is it clear? So maybe it's within the first 100 days of being elected, I would introduce this bill to support school counselors. Or maybe it's that you want to make sure that X amount of funding is dedicated to healthcare, and that you have a very specific way that you plan to introduce that, to support that, to involve yourself with others. And this is true at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. It could be as simple as, I know that at this one street corner, there's not a working lamppost. And so I'm going to make sure that there's a lamppost because I know that that will keep people safe at night. Whatever the specific directions you are going to take to fulfill your vision are, that's what you want to make sure is clear and bulleted out for people. And the last one is proof. And this is wildly important for the people that you speak to, but it's also important for you, going back to those concepts of imposter syndrome or fear. This is how you remind yourself that you can do it. So you want something that's anecdotal. Maybe you have evidence from people who have worked with you and who've been able to see you in action. Maybe you're pulling from data and saying X number of people who follow this course that I want to follow see these types of results. You want these data points to be inspirational inspirational, but also relevant. You want them to be true, but you also want them to bring to people's hearts. So things that make you feel inspired are likely going to inspire others. Things that give you confidence are going to inspire confidence in you from those who are voting for you. So I often say, if you don't know how to bring a process into fruition, into being, then go ahead and think about how you would communicate a process. Does it have a vision? Is it founded in empathy? Is there a direction that it's going? And what's the proof that it will work? We use this same process to help women build out their initial vision or story of self that they would share when they want to run for office. And I think that it's wildly important to get an understanding of yourself and what your leadership style will be. So I will come back to this at the end, but I just want to go ahead and list some bullet points. We went through this very quickly, but I want you to be able to have this in mind specifically as we're talking to Reverend Dr. Kraft, that pursuing big goals takes small steps to get there. So how can you intentionally take small risks? How can you notice your imposterism triggers? How are you going to acknowledge your skills? How are you going to change your mindset about failure? How do you want to communicate your plans with others? Or do you want to communicate it with yourself? How will you invite feedback or build a support system? Now, you do not have to do all of these things today, but I would like you at the end of this webinar to be committed to doing one of these things and have a specific action for you associated with that. So again, take a mental note. How will I intentionally take small risks or notice triggers or build skills or acknowledge skills? What are you going to do differently or do anew as a result of this webinar? So as you're thinking about that and hold on to that, we're going to go ahead and bring in Reverend Dr. Bernadine Kraft. I actually think Rich, who's the CEO of ACA, will be joining to introduce her. So I'll just give a quick pause.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead. Excellent. Thank you, Rich.
Good afternoon, everyone. You know, although I've been ACA's CEO for more than 20 years, I've been with the organization for 33, and my start was in the Government Affairs and Public Policy Department. So in some ways, this is my home base, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. So, you know, ACA has been promoting and advocating on issues of social justice and personal empowerment for as long as I can remember. And we haven't just advocated for the practice and employment of professional counselors, but our mission demands that we work on behalf of the clients, students, and communities who are served by our members. So let's face it, counselors are a passionate bunch. And that passion is what drives our staff and me to do our work. When I began my journey with ACA back in the mid-'80s, I was fortunate to learn of our members' passion and advocacy from some very, very dedicated members. And over the years, those members have continued to work for those who are less fortunate and in need of services. Some have continued to work as professional counselors, and others received an additional calling to do their work in other arenas, such as public policy and even within religious institutions. So today I have the great pleasure of introducing someone who I've known and been honored to work with for 3 decades. The Reverend Bernadine Kraft is an Episcopal priest, but before that, she served in the Wyoming legislature as an elected representative and senator. And before that, she served the students and members of her community as a professional counselor. I'm not sure how one person can be so accomplished, but my thinking is that it comes from her commitment to serve and her belief that all people deserve dignity, support, and respect. She's been a tireless advocate for those in need for many years. We're honored that she could take the time to be with us today, and rather than read off her various roles and positions from her incredibly impressive resume, I think it would be more beneficial to hear from her directly. So at this time, it's with great honor that I introduce a true shero of mine, Bernadine Kraft.
Thank you, Rich. And Bernadine, we'll get right into it. I just want to give everyone on the line a reminder that if you have questions, go ahead and include them in the Q&A. And you had given me permission. I just want to acknowledge publicly that you'd given me permission to call you Bernie. I am in full honor of your beautiful titles and the work that you've done to acquire them. But we'll have a more casual conversation with me and you, Bernie. So I wanted to just start off. We talked about imposter syndrome. I want to know, what did this look like for you in your life, and particularly as you ran for office?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that question. And thanks so much for having me. And I have to just take just a little personal moment and say how thrilled I was to see Rich Yep, because he is actually the person I was working with when I got my start in an interest in being involved politically. I was on the Government Relations Committee. I have no idea what they call it now, but it was the Government Relations Committee of the American Counseling Association. Rich was the staff person. So he's right, we go back 3 decades. And I just want to give a big shout out to the Counseling Association, to their excellence, to their support for all of us that are working to do all of this. And I actually started as a lobbyist for not only Wyoming, but Colorado. And what did I lobby first? About counselor licensure. I am an LPC, and Rich, so I told the different things I do in chronological order, but in actuality, I did a number of them all at once. I actually still have a private psychotherapy practice, and I still work in the education field. So I'm still a counselor too. And that's always been the defining thing for me. But just to kind of kick off in terms of getting started, I never, ever in 100 million years thought I would run for elected office. I loved politics. I loved government relations. I loved being a lobbyist, loved it. But I never, ever saw myself in that position. It took a lot of other people encouraging me, a lot of other people telling me I needed to do this. And I so resonated with the discussion we had earlier. And thank you so much for that, because it really underscored what actually does happen out there in the real world. Most of us that end up in state legislatures and state senates didn't really see ourselves being there. It wasn't our dream as a kid. So thanks so much for doing all this. And I am anxious to hear all the questions. And do call me Bernie, please. That's a really big, long title. And sometimes it frightens me. I was interested that we had the imposter syndrome discussion, because I have it to the extent that I have nightmares sometimes about failing. When I was just first going to get my PhD, for about 2 months beforehand, I had a nightmare virtually nightly about the graduate school calling me up and telling me they had figured me out, and that even though I had all these various degrees and awards, I didn't really know anything, and they had figured out I didn't know anything, and they weren't going to give me my PhD. So it's very real, and I still deal with it. And I look at those list of titles and they scare me. So do call me Bernie.
Well, I'm happy to call you Bernie. I'm happy to acknowledge your titles. And I'm so sorry. The nightmares sound hard. And certainly you deserve to be free of that. One of the stories that you actually shared with us on that same vein was about your title and about how your success and the strides that you had made was a real inspiration to younger girls coming up, and what that meant for them. And I think this really speaks to like owning our power and moving forward. So if you wanted to share that story, I think that it's a really powerful example of how this shows up for ourselves, but how it impacts others as well.
Oh, I would love to share that, because that really is, and probably if there was anything that helped me kind of get over that fear and acknowledge that I could be a role model, and I could be someone that could help others. And there's nothing that I am more excited about doing than helping other women run for political office. But this went clear back to when I did first receive my PhD. And at that time, I was still working as a school counselor. I was in the schools. And all of a sudden, you know, everybody at the school, all the kids were calling me Dr. Kraft. Well, our local newspaper and local publications continued to refer to me as Ms. Kraft. Now, the interesting thing was I had the PhD. There were other people in education who had various forms of doctorates, but not PhDs, who were all called doctor, and they were all men, and they were all called Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so, and then Ms. Kraft. It upset me, it hurt me. It really, really irritated my mother, who really wanted to take him on. But you know what happened? The students at the junior high school where I was working as a counselor got really angry and really became very aware that the only difference between me and those other people that were being called doctor was they were male and I was female. So they started this massive letters to the editor campaign, and they just flooded the newspaper with letters from junior high school students saying it was unfair, that I had worked just as hard as anybody else, and they were going to make sure their parents canceled the subscription to the newspaper if they didn't start calling me doctor. And I'll be darned, they started calling me doctor, and they have ever since. So it was kids. And that made me realize, wow, the impact we can have on folks.
I think that is such a wonderful story. One, because there's so much about public service that resonates for people, but I think the greatest opportunity and the greatest fear is often the impact that our leadership will have on others. And even though this is a small example, I think it speaks to the influence as a leader you had on the students that you were working with, and then would go on to serve as their representative, that people are watching and that they are taking positive notes from the things that we do when we serve them well. So thank you for sharing that story. We do have a few questions from our participants. The first one being, what was your main issue when you first ran for office? And I got to hear a bit about this, so I'm excited for for our participants today to be able to hear from you.
Yes. My big issues when I was running, and I can't say enough how good the discussion was beforehand, because it was just, I was sitting there checking it off, going yes. Because you do have to have your own voice, and you do have to have your issues. And I always, my platform always was simply this: the voice for those who have no voice. That was me. And that didn't play well with big government. It didn't play well with the big industries, but it did play well with the people, because my passion was always being there to represent the people who couldn't afford the big lobbyists, who couldn't afford those high-powered discussions in the private little rooms, the people that were the genuine voice of Wyoming. So my passions always were children, of course. Children, education was my big issue. Education rights, the developmentally disabled and delayed folks, women's issues, women and children, and domestic violence, sexual assault. I am really proud of the fact that of every single one of the domestic violence and sexual assault protection bills that we ran in the legislature, and I was the only woman in the Senate. I was the only female senator. So I had a variety of male co-sponsors, but one of them in particular was always my sponsor with the domestic violence, sexual assault bills, and we never lost one. We lost a lot of others, but we never lost one of those.
Oh, that's impressive. I love that.
That was pretty exciting. And you know what I think it was? I think it was our passion. I think it was because we cared so much. And I could tell story after story after story about how people's lives were affected. Wyoming has a citizen legislature, meaning that we don't meet full time. We meet for 2-month periods, and then with a lot of different committees that meet throughout the interim kind of thing. So we go down there for 2 months, which actually feels more like 4 months. But what that means, and it's very important, it means that you go home and you live with the laws you made. Mm-hmm. You go home and the person next door says, thank you for this, or why didn't you support that? So my passion right off the bat were for the people who were underprivileged, who were disabled, who were living in poverty, who were living in fear, who were living with any number of conditions like that, and to try to make it better, and especially for our children and our youth, and especially our educational system. Right now, we're in a terrible economic slump, and education is taking huge hits. And I find myself, this is actually only my first term out of the Senate. So I'm still feeling very much the need to go down there and yell about education issues, but I'll resist that impulse and leave it to my colleagues to hopefully get that funding back in there.
Yeah. So I'm combining a couple questions here. We have this curiosity of you're a licensed counselor, you're a lobbyist. Was it part of your plan to transition into a political seat? But also, how did all of these transitions happen if that wasn't the plan?
Yeah, it never was. Like I said, I was always so interested in politics, and I love to debate and I love to talk. So being a lobbyist was an easy fit. As I said, that all came from the American Counseling Association. I was so passionate about their issues, and most particularly at that point in time, counselor licensure. And just a fun little anecdote about this: you never know where you're going to end up, because I ended up presenting the counselor licensure bill to the Senate Labor Health Committee. This old codger of a guy was chairing the Senate Labor Health Committee. I went through my big thing about the importance of counselor licensure, and he looked at me and said, "Well, guess what, little girl? Next thing you know, you're going to want us to start licensing the fortune tellers and the gypsies." And I remember that greatly, because 30 years later, I was on that same Senate Labor Health Committee, and he was still the chair of it. And we still thought about it. But interestingly, we became kind of good friends. I became his vice chair, and we fought about everything. We particularly fought about Medicare expansion and Medicaid expansion, but we became actually kind of respectful adversaries, if you will. But that was my initial impression of the legislative process. I was a counselor. I was a teacher, because I'd always been I've always taught psychology and counselor ed classes also. So that was me. And when actually the way I became involved in politics, I was approached. People came to me. There was an open seat in my House district. The gentleman who had just retired as Speaker of the House was from my House district and wasn't going to run again. So a group of people came to see me and said, "Bernadine, this House seat is open. We really want you to run for it. We think you would be wonderful. We'll help you." And I've always told people that had they come and said, "Bernadine, have you considered running nude through the streets of Rock Springs?" I could not have been more surprised. Could not have been. It was like, that was so off my radar. It never occurred to me to run for an elected office, ever. And the big one for me, and I looked at the list up there, and the one that I pointed to was, "But what if I don't win?" I'm actually, and I think many counselors are, we're really very sensitive. We're very sensitive, we're very empathetic. I kept thinking, well, but what if I don't win, and that'll mean nobody likes me, and what if they don't? I mean, I was frightened. I was terribly frightened. But people encouraged me, and they didn't ask me once. They asked me time after time after time after time. They started asking me in March. The deadline to file was in May. Back then, you couldn't do online filing. You had to actually physically or by mail get your application into Cheyenne, which is 250 miles from where I live. One of these people who was so anxious to see me run actually drove my application to Cheyenne on the very last day so it would be there on time. So I was just lucky that I had this group of people who saw something in me that I absolutely did not see in myself. I did not. But they saw it, and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed. And finally I said, if I don't do this, I'll always regret it. And I was down there a very long time, and I have to say, There were ups and there were downs, but I loved every second of it.
Oh, absolutely. I just love hearing all of these stories. And I think it's so important to recognize the role of people supporting you along the way. She should run, we actually have a little quiz. It just keeps things fun. It's called the roll call quiz, and acknowledging that everyone has a role to play in getting more women to run for office. And how do we bring our skills to playing those different roles? Are we the person who hypes these women up and is like, you can do it, I think you should do it? Are we the person who's pragmatic and says, okay, I'm going to help you put together a plan, or I'll be your campaign manager? Having all of these supporters is so helpful. So we're getting near the end. I do want to draw attention to the chat. We have a very quick survey. Please take time to finish it. Your feedback is so important to us. The link again is in the chat right now. It should take no longer than 3 minutes. We would really appreciate your feedback on today's session. And I want to go ahead and close out with just one final question with you, Bernadine. Or Bernie, sorry. I'm really curious. A lot of people are asking about the various qualifications, and you're certainly a very qualified woman yourself, all the things it takes to get from point zero to elected. I'm just curious, what would you offer as your advice for what you think makes a person well prepared to begin their political journey?
And that's so important. And I just glanced into the chat, and I saw someone say in response to me, you weren't lucky, you were prepared. And I appreciated that comment, because I think I was prepared without even realizing I was prepared. I think the preparation comes from, first of all, that keen interest in the events and the political process, and being part of the solution as opposed to just watching things happen. And that willingness, that it takes a big willingness to put yourself out there, because it is a risk. It's a risk in a number of different ways that I didn't even really know until I did it. But it was worth it. It was worth it, but you have to be willing to do that. You do have to be willing to stand up and speak for what you believe. So you do have to be passionate. And you're not passionate about everything. I have to confess, I wasn't particularly passionate about livestock or water issues or the oil and gas industry. But that was okay. I could learn about them, be knowledgeable about them. But what I was passionate about, I was willing to stand up and speak and be counted. You have to be able to, and this is hard for a lot of us too, you have to be able to build a team and say, help me guys, because I'm very frequently the one who wants to do it all myself, and you can't. You absolutely can't. You have to be able to rely on other people and accept their offers for help, accept everything they have to give you. And I think what truly the number one thing is the passion, the commitment, and the willingness to say, yep, I'll get involved. I'll do this.
Yeah, I'm just going to underscore that. The passion, the commitment, the willingness. Notice, I want everyone to notice, she did not say it was the PhD. She did not say it was the library. It's the passion, the commitment, and the willingness. And consider that as part of your self-reflection. Bernie, I adore you. I am so grateful that I had a second opportunity, and today's attendees had their first opportunity to be able to hear from you. A huge thank you to the ACA for inviting us. If anything that we've shared today is of interest to you, please do check us out at sheshouldrun.org. I hope that all of you will consider the valuable role that you can play in your communities, in your states, or in our country by running for office. Thank you so much for dedicating an hour of your afternoon to be here with us. And again, I wish I could have a whole room of people applaud for you, Bernie. It was so wonderful to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you, ACA, my group, my gang. And I love being with you all. And thank you for including me. I hope we'll have this opportunity again, because I loved every minute of it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your afternoons. We'll see you next time.